Hello, everybody. You're listening to the Big Chill Podcast. This is episode 416, Stats, Seams, and Subs with Jarrod Kimber. Hello, Big Chillians, and welcome back to the Big Chill Podcast. I'm Frank, joined as always with Eddie. How's it going?
Yeah, not too bad. We have also another guest at the moment because we have Abby, our new intern, who's observing for the first time. You can say hello, Abby, if you'd like to.
Hello.
There you go. But yeah, so she's going to be helping out with us with a number of things, which is, I guess, it's another more natural way for us to plug. If you're listening and you're not following us on any of the social media platforms, search for the Big Chill Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and you'll find us there. It's a better way to interact with us, and you actually can get us our attention pretty easily.
Yeah, and I think that's the perfect segue, Eddie, to our first topic, where Instagram was overloaded by the meeting of Ronaldo and Tom Brady. I don't know if you saw that. The amount of energy that just exploded from that picture. Ronaldo scored a hat trick for the first time in 14 years in the Premier League, and then Tom Brady came out of retirement. So what a energy that picture was.
Yeah, I found it interesting because Ronaldo's post of the image said it's always something along the lines of it's always great talking to another GOAT, which I like the idea that he's just happy, not that it's wrong, but he's just happy to put himself into like the greatest of all time category, just self-promoted, self-elected, all-time great, but indisputable, I suppose. But yeah, big meeting. And then also, I don't know if you saw the video clip, he straight out asked Tom Brady if he was done. And Tom Brady kind of didn't answer the question.
Yeah.
And a couple hours later, it turned out he wasn't.
Do you think Ronaldo impacted that?
I'm going to assume his mind was already made up. But maybe there is a part that if he went there and he saw Cristiano Ronaldo scoring a hat trick at a fairly old age by, professional footballer standards, that maybe that was somewhat inspirational. But I mean, I don't know how I feel about the whole Brady retirement now, because ultimately, do you think in his mind he was ever actually retired? Or do you think this was just a case of him, almost his hand got a little bit forced by people like Adam Schefter and stuff reporting the fact that he was retired? But it feels to me like he never really mentally checked out. And in a sense, this was all just a bunch of social media nonsense that we could have avoided.
I think he did it so he didn't have to get the constant questions for at least that 3-week span where he's like, hey guys, I'm retired. Then it was 1 week of, oh my God, Brady's retired. Then everyone stopped. He got to relax for 3 weeks, a month. And then he kind of was like, hey, you know what? I'm not retired. Because otherwise it would be every day of, are you going to retire? Are you going to play? Are you going to play? Are you going to play? Are you going to play?
That is annoying. That's true.
See?
I mean, we've been through.
And you've got 8 followers on Instagram. Imagine it was Brady.
We've been through 40 days of his speculation that he was going to the Niners or speculation that he might come back. So I don't know how much.
But it wasn't bothering him.
Avoided.
No one was asking him.
You really think no one asked him? You think for 40 days, everyone just
the world forgot who Tom Brady was.
Yeah. I mean, in the 40 days, we probably discussed him 4 times. So if you just imagine that, the ESPN Fox coverage was somewhat endless. I mean, the speculation linking him to the Niners was so strong. My perspective on this is almost he wanted 1 or 2 things to happen from his decision to supposedly retire. Either he wanted Bruce Arians to get fired, and this was his way of making it clear that he didn't like
fire Bruce Arians 1 year after winning the Super Bowl.
I don't know or he wanted to be traded to the Niners, and this was he knew that there was no way that was going to happen unless he put it in a situation where the Bucs thought he was not going to play anyway. And so I feel like almost from him, one of those 2 things was the goal, and he was making his poker move. And then eventually he's realized probably neither one's happening, and he's decided just to come back literally hours before free agency was about to open, and the Bucs would have struggled to re-sign some players.
Yeah, maybe. I also saw, did you see he credited LeBron James for partially unretiring as well? So he just wants to cover every great athlete in every sport has some impact on him, because he said LeBron James apparently texted him, said, hey, we're at the best ever at what we do. We're competing with each other at this point for being the best. And then LeBron James dropped 54 points. Was that 3 days ago? And then Brady texted him back, said, "All right, I'll come back then."
I mean, if that's the case,
That's
then
all it
Tom Brady
takes.
is it's a very easily influenced human being, but which is maybe entirely possible because he's kind of in a mini cult where he doesn't eat strawberries or whatever. But like, you know, I feel like in his mind, because whenever they spoke to his agent or his dad, neither one of them would ever say that he was truly retired. So I feel as if the people who had inside information and were truly speaking to him about it in detail must have known all along that it definitely wasn't a firm retirement. But I mean, it's good news for the Bucks, and overall, it's good news for the NFL. It makes it more interesting. But I mean, for the people who hate Tom Brady, of which there are many, I did like the just like angry reaction to the fact that he was going to continue playing football, which just blows my mind. Just how worked up people can get, even if they don't support any team he's ever played for. They've never had really any personal impact from him playing football, but it's just pure rage.
Yeah, I have to admit the more pure rage, at least in my family group text messaging chat we have, is that Joe Buck is now going to Monday Night Football. That created quite the outrage in my family chat.
We've previously discussed that. I don't get why you don't like Joe Buck.
I actually,
I really
this is the funny thing. I actually like Joe Buck outside of broadcasting. Like I've heard him being interviewed 2 or 3 times, and I've listened to his podcast, and it's all very funny. I think he's actually a really funny, really smart guy. I just don't like the way he commentates.
I think he kind of follows a script, and that bit's annoying once you realize, like when he just does the thing where it's like, and it's caught, and he does that all game long. That bit is annoying, and he
That
adds
wasn't
very
bad,
little
Eddie.
detail.
That was pretty good.
Thank you. I work part time as a Joe Buck impersonator, but
On the
he
streets of Paris. No one
yeah,
knows it except during American tourist season. You just clean up.
it's a rough life. I've probably made some mistakes in decisions I've made, but he I don't know. He overall, I think he's interesting. He at least like his voice and just he has a presence that a lot of other people don't have in as like commentators or announcers. So he at least has that going for him. It kind of makes sense for Monday. Look, if it's a choice between him and Booger McFarland, I'm taking Joe Buck every time.
Oh,
These are the
God.
options we have from.
Yeah, Buck. How about if you had Booger and Buck? Now that would be a great one.
Yeah, it's like a 70s crime fighting duo. But and I guess if we're talking about announcers and commentators and journalists, it's a good opportunity for us to just, we'll have a lot of new listeners tuning in specifically for the interview, which is the larger part of this podcast, our interview with Jarrod Kimber, cricket author, YouTuber, content creator. And that interview should kick in about, I don't know, 25 to 30 minutes in. Obviously, listen to this up until that point, but if you really want to skip ahead, you can go. It's
No.
there.
Don't skip ahead. No, not allowed.
But yeah, but a very interesting discussion. And for if you don't like cricket, following on from our interview with Chris Cairns last week, even if you don't like cricket, I think it's a interesting insight into some aspects of cricketing culture. And definitely if you're a baseball fan and you like sabermetrics and statistics and analytics, it's kind of an interesting way of seeing how that's developing in cricket.
Or if you love going to the Caribbean for a vacation, we have a nice little segment on that.
It's also the first time that anyone's mentioned nipples on the podcast, and he managed to do it twice. So if anyone's keeping stats on how often nipples like pop up in our podcast, then there you go. That's 2-0.
Sam? No, maybe not. Sam might have.
No, Sam's lifestyle choices mean he probably has less interest in nipples, but he didn't come up as often when he was on the podcast. But yeah, speaking of, I guess, wow, that's a hard transition from Sam to Chelsea, but I could have tried to do it. But we obviously spoke about the saga going on with Chelsea. Each podcast, it feels like we had to do some kind of update on the situation in Ukraine, the situation with Chelsea. Not too much has changed since our last episode when we kind of went over all the sanctions that have been placed on Chelsea. However, the latest development is when we spoke about it at the back end of last week, they were in a position where they were not going to be able to sell. They have now been told that they can sell the club, that they are open to bids until Friday. So if we want to hurry up and put a bid
We got
in,
time.
we've got until Yeah, we got a few days. Supposedly they have had over 200 interested parties, which kind of blows my mind that there are 200 individuals or groups of people out there willing to spend 2 billion plus pounds on a football club. The process then is the bids
Is
will
it?
be closed on.
Oh, okay, go ahead. I was
Go
saying, is
ahead.
it gonna be like an auction style kind of thing, like a
No, so the
silent
bids will
auction?
be no, the bids will be closed on Friday. The Chelsea, the club itself, will then choose who they think is their preferred bidder. Then it
Oh,
has to go to the Brit. It then has to go to the British government, who have to approve whoever is going to buy the club. And then the complicated detail is they have to work out where are the funds going, because obviously this situation all stems from the fact that Roman Abramovich is not supposed to be getting large chunks of money flowing in. So they have to work out where is this 2 billion going to go, which bank account is it going to arrive in, which country is it going to go to. And once the British government has given the okay to that, they then have to go through the normal process of having a football club sold in England, which is you then have this like fit and proper test that the Premier League tries to check whether the owner really has enough money, and kind of to make sure that there's no uh, ties to any uh, areas of the world that they don't want to have the ties to, which obviously has worked really well based on the fact that Roman Abramovich bought a club and that the Saudi investment fund bought a club earlier this year. But yeah, they hope to have that basically, if everything goes to plan, then in the next 6 weeks, they think they could have the club actually sold.
I got a few questions. When you say Chelsea will decide, who is that in Chelsea that's deciding? Because it's obviously not going to be the owner, right?
Yeah, he's completely been removed from all decision making. Over the weekend, they disqualified him as an owner. Was the decision the Premier
what,
League
what,
made?
a, what a weird terminology.
That was the official term they used. He's
I
been
know, I love it.
disqualified as an owner. I don't actually know who within the club is the person making that final decision. I guess it's the makeup of their board, the community, the sort of charitable fund
I'm sure they
fund
have like a board of
fund.
directors or something, right?
They have they have a board of directors. The issue is that some of those will have pretty close ties to Roman Abramovich. So I don't know if they want to trust the board to make the decision that they're kind of trying to take away from Roman Abramovich, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
But no, they'll have that decision made, and
Okay.
then
And then
I mean they
I'll say here's my next
and
one
then
then is so like what you're saying, whoever buys the club for X amount of pounds, is he getting the money? I don't get it. Like, because he owns it now, right? So if someone's going to buy it from him, but he's technically not an owner anymore because he's been disqualified, is he going to be getting any money, or is it just going to go into a pot that's going to get just like distributed across England?
I don't know if that's clear, and that's the thing the British government has to work out, as to where that money's going.
That's a big
Originally, right? He
loss. That's a big
yeah.
loss for him.
Originally, he pledged that any profits he was going to make from the sale of the club were going to go to victims of the war in Ukraine. He didn't say victims on which side or kind of what exactly that was going to look like. Now, I don't think he'll make any profit from selling the club. The other issue is, even if
But
they're buying it for,
will he get his money back, I guess, from what he originally paid? Is that something they're considering?
well, the club is personally indebted to Roman Abramovich
Yeah, we
for the
went through
tune of
that.
about £2 billion. So even if they sell it for 2 billion, then that would only be wiping his debt, the debt that the club supposedly owes to him. I very much doubt he will see any of the money. In particular, like the BBC just launched an investigation into his background in terms of how he got the money, a lot of which is not a secret, but more details have come to light about the fact that basically he was involved in some fairly unscrupulous takeovers of Russian businesses in the sort of breakdown of the Soviet Union. And there's kind of more details than were previously available as to how that might have worked. So it continues to make the source of his original wealth look worse and worse. So I very much doubt he'll see any of the money. I mean, he did just, everything is being seized everywhere. He just had to move his super yacht, I think, to Montenegro, because it was docked in, I think, Portugal. And they've just had to rush and move it to Montenegro to avoid it being seized, to get it out of the EU. So I doubt any money will make its way to him. It probably will go to a charity or something, but I doubt Roman Abramovich will ever see a dime. He doesn't need. I mean, he's so rich, he doesn't need the money, assuming that his stuff gets unfrozen at some point. But he doesn't actually need it.
Yeah, it's still a loss. I'm sure he doesn't want to take.
I mean, the whole principle of him owning Chelsea, he never cared about losing money. I mean, that's how they've been successful. They've been the most successful club in England over the last 20 years when you look at the number of trophies they've won in that time span. Well, 19 since he bought it. And like, I mean, they've spent over £1 billion on players. He's famously given away large sums of money. Like when Mourinho left, he gave him a Ferrari just as a additional severance package. So I don't think he's been too concerned with losing money when it comes to owning Chelsea. And it's kind of achieved the goal that he wanted it to do, which was it legitimized his presence in the UK and it gave him a profile that he otherwise would not have had as just another Russian oligarch. In the end, it's probably kind of been his undoing because everyone in the UK knows who Roman Abramovich is. And if he hadn't owned Chelsea, we wouldn't. So for 19 years, it was a great move. And then now it looks like it probably wasn't.
So I guess shifting gears from real European football to fake European football, we often discuss Ted Lasso on the podcast. And yesterday was the Critics' Choice Awards, and Ted Lasso cleaned up. So Ted Lasso won Best Comedy Series. Sudeikis won Best Actor in a Comedy Series. Brett Goldstein won Best Supporting Actor. And Hannah Waddingham won Best Supporting Actress. So they pretty much swept the awards, except for lead female, because they technically don't have one, I guess. But so while we were not so hot on season 2,
I feel like this is sort of success and credit it should have had for season 1.
Yeah.
And then everyone's realized that season 1 was pretty good. And then Ted Lasso had that massive moment of becoming super, super popular. And then these awards are kind of recognition for that original achievement more than the second season, which was definitely not as good as the first.
Yeah, I thought season 2 was good, and then the other thing you have to think of as there's not many comedies anymore on television. There's not many like true good comedies, so it's a category that's not that stacked, I guess.
Yeah, and tying in Ted Lasso with real life events in English football. I don't know if you saw, but Jesse Marsch, who's the fairly new manager of Leeds United, who is American, had like a super American moment after his first match in charge when he had the team form a huddle after the game on the pitch, which raised eyebrows from people around England too. Like huddles are a fairly new thing in like British sports anyway, but definitely post match a huddle on the pitch is totally unheard of. And it did have a lot of people in like the coverage of the game talking about how it felt like it was a scene right out of Ted Lasso, particularly given the fact that they had lost. But we'll see if he manages to turn things around with Leeds because they're in free fall.
I thought Leeds won.
They won. They won their second match. This was his first match in charge.
Okay.
Lost. Yeah. Then they had a last minute winner in his second game. So maybe
did they huddle then?
I don't know. I stopped paying attention, but I mean, I guess if you're writing the Ted Lasso script, he had the huddle, post match huddle, and then the last minute winner. It's kind of going. And if he's following the Ted Lasso script, they're also supposed to be relegated in his first season. So we'll see.
Oh, there we go.
He's able to. Yeah.
Actually, Eddie, I had one more small topic for our side podcast of Soup Juice. White Claw is launching a new beverage category. I don't know if you saw this, but they're launching a surf-inspired product line. Let me read these out. Tell me if you're interested in drinking them. The White Claw Surf Tropical Pomelo Smash, the Citrus Yuzu Smash, and the Wildberry Acai Smash. I don't know why they had to put smash at the end of every one of them.
So, I mean, I have to come clean here. I've never had White Claw because it like kind of doesn't really exist in Europe. I've had equivalent, alternatives because the sort of hard seltzer movement is kind of here, but not really.
Is it just delayed? Because it's actually leaving the United States now. Like that's the crazy stat, I think, is it's down, 250% this like the last year and a half or something like that.
I think
everyone drank seltzer and now no one drinks seltzer.
A few
anymore.
brands have launched, and like some of the bigger like alcohol brands have launched their own versions of hard seltzer, including like BrewDog has its own hard seltzer, but which they got into. There was a controversial moment with BrewDog where they tried to promote their hard seltzer as like a health drink, and their CEO had to apologize. It's been a bad year for BrewDog. They've had like a number of controversial. They like mistreated employees, and Yeah. But
That's a shame.
as for
Great place.
why the hard seltzer,
Great
I think
wings.
people here haven't been able to wrap their minds around why they would get a can of hard seltzer versus just like making a vodka soda or like having a gin and tonic or something. I think that's been the difficult sell.
I feel like the reason it would become popular in a place like Paris is because they would want to imitate
Maybe. I mean,
what Americans are drinking.
it took
That's the only
beer
way I
pong
can
a
see it
long
becoming
time
popular.
to become popular.
Kind of like, yeah, that's what I was going to
Yeah,
say. Kind of like beer pong, and now it's
as we
freaking
mentioned when I
everywhere
went
in
to a rugby
Paris.
match a couple months ago, there were little kids playing beer pong who, I mean, they don't associate the game with alcohol. They just want to see red Solo cups and they want to
Just
throw ping pong
wasted.
balls in them, and they have no idea where it comes from. But I I don't know. I mean, the other issue here is with the people who've launched brands, the hard seltzer brands in Europe, they've been really expensive. It's like you go to a supermarket and a can of it is like €5. So again, it's hard to yeah, it's hard to convince yourself.
Oh my God.
You'll buy a 4-pack.
It's
Like
fucking
a
insane.
4-pack is €20. So if you're intending on having quite a few, you're going to rack up quite the tab, even in your own house.
You can get 2 liters
Yeah.
of cider for
No, so it's
99
definitely not going to be
cents.
the choice of like alcoholics or homeless people. But it's I don't know. I think that's been a big issue. I mean, one bar I go to, the Cross, had its I think it had its like own hard seltzer that the group that owned it created because they're a brewery, so they had their own. And again, like a can of it was like €9 in the bar, and I just don't know why. When you tell someone they could have just ordered a vodka soda for
That's
$6.50,
crazy.
like why on earth would they do it? But as for the flavors you threw out there, I mean, I'd give them a try. I don't think I'm ever going to be a hard seltzer convert, but I'd give it a go.
It can be refreshing sometimes if it's like
Sure, I
really
mean, I
hot
like gin
out.
and
It can
tonic
be a nice little
sometimes,
change of
same kind
pace.
of concept in a way, but I'm not opposed to, and like our trip to Ascot always involves like Pims and stuff. I'm not opposed to a more refreshing drink than a beer,
Oh
but
yeah.
I don't think I'm ever going to be coming home from the supermarket with multiple cans of hard seltzer.
3 months
Yeah,
till
3 months.
Pims.
It's coming up fast. Yeah, any other topics caught your eye this week, Frank? Does your paper cup have your name on it?
Yes, my name is Jimmy John.
No, on the side.
No.
What's the word on the side?
Freaky.
Oh, I thought it said Frank. All right.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Yeah, anything else?
No, I think maybe next podcast when we have more time, I want to hear you melt down about Blackburn and Dak's return and all of that. But that's a lot to unpack and unload. So I can't. I have to give you more than 10 minutes for that. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know if I can fully unload because obviously the plan is to have John Buckley on the podcast in the next couple of weeks, and it might be more awkward to have a Blackburn player on if I spend 30 minutes ripping them apart.
yeah.
So,
And you don't want to cry on the podcast.
no. There's no crying in podcasting. All right, on that note, should we switch over to the interview with Jarrod Kimber? Welcome back to the Big Chill Podcast. We're now joined by our guest, Jarrod Kimber. Jarrod, in some respects, I'm not even sure how best to describe you. You're an author, journalist, content creator. You're sort of all over the shop at the moment, podcaster.
Yeah, I've done everything. I mean, I've been an analyst for teams. Made a documentary, written a few books. I suppose I always go with when you're a bit like me. It's like when they ask you at the airport what job you do, I always say writer. And then if I'm going through a country that knows nothing about cricket, I say cricket writer. And if I'm going to a country that knows a lot about cricket, I say sports writer and hope they don't ask a follow up. But yeah, so everything comes from writing. But yeah, podcasts. I did heaps of sports commentary as well now. Essentially unemployed, but constantly seeking opportunities is probably the best way of putting it.
Sounds a little bit like the dream. I mean, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. We're big fans of your YouTube content. I think you create some of the most original cricket YouTube content out there. I mean, I don't know necessarily how, for listeners, they might be trying to work their way kind of minds around how original cricket content can be, but you have such a distinct style in the stuff that you create.
Yeah, so I started on YouTube probably back when it started, so around 2005, 2006, and then I had a bit of a breakout with YouTube stuff in 2010, 11 with a show called Two Pricks at the Ashes, which makes slightly more sense if you follow cricket. If you don't, I suppose sounds quite weird, like we were fucking a fire or something. But um, so we had a hit with that, and then I got picked up with it by ESPN after that. Surprisingly, they asked us to change the name, and that was 2011. I was like, well, I'm not going back to YouTube. I've evolved beyond YouTube. But I had a friend who actually worked at ESPN with me, and I trained him up on how to do stuff. And then he left and started his own company. And he kept saying, just come back. And I was like, I'm not going to be one of those idiots who sits in front of a camera saying things on YouTube. I did that before people even knew that was a profession, right? And then he said, well, why don't we animate stuff? And I was like, what, we could do that? We could put other things in front of my face? That'd be great. I don't even have to get dressed in the morning, right? And then I suppose we took that and we twisted it a little bit. But there are some shows now where I am like an idiot sitting in front of a camera on YouTube. But there's also, a lot of animated stuff and other things. But the whole thing was, how can we build a YouTube channel with as little of my face on it as possible? And luckily, through a few things, I suppose Vox was one of the first things I sort of noticed doing that. And then when we started putting these videos up, people kept mentioning a guy called John Boyce. I don't know if you guys have come across him, but he works for Secret Base now. Was SB Nation originally, and people were already comparing my work to him. So I went and looked at him and went, okay, what does this guy do so I can make my videos even longer without my face being on them? And that's really been the real trick at the moment, is trying to do that as much as possible. But it's been fun. Like, the thing is that weirdly, since I left YouTube, no one really took up that sort of cricket YouTube space. So everyone who's on it really is, young kids trying to make their way, or former players who say controversial things, hoping that their YouTube page gets mentioned in a newspaper, which means that there's a lot of space in the middle between those two things for me to come back in. So it's been good fun.
I mean, you touched on a topic there that I actually wanted to ask you about specifically, which was the animations that you have, which I think is kind of a very distinct feature of your. Who does those? Is that you that puts them together? Is that the friend that you refer to? Kind of what's that like?
No, there's so many different kinds of animations. I think if you know anything about filmmaking, you're probably spending the whole time watching our videos going, oh, I see what he's done. Oh, I see how he's cheated here. I remember once I did something about an Alaskan bobsledder, and we took apart an animation of like Santa or something and made it look like bobsledding. There's so many cheats in our animation. The actual animations of the cricket are done by a guy called Rahul, who you can find on Instagram. I think he's cricket underscore animation, or it's animation underscore cricket. He's brilliant. Sadly, he doesn't speak English, so I have to talk to him through the other people in our company. He only speaks Hindi, and I barely speak English, so between us, we're not particularly a good match. So he does the cricket animations. Almost everything else you see is either made by myself or one of my producers, either Muku, Shubu, or Arya. And it's a lot of it. It's just like, how can we get things to move on the screen so it looks like we're doing great animation? But really, that was something I really learned from John Boyce, because originally I was like, how is he animating 40 minutes? And I just went through and broke down his videos, and it's like, oh, it's basically, he just makes things move really slowly. Well, I can do that. And so there's a couple of really good programs out there that you can get quite cheap, which is Doodly, another one called Cartoonly, and then, After Effects, Final Cut Pro. There's all these little sorts of cheats around everything. But I think with video essays, which is, I suppose, a lot of what I make, it's like, if the story is really good and you can tell them in a way that is engaging, people will be like, oh, okay, well, at least the screen's moving. Something's happening. Okay, he's made a shit joke, but at the very least, with that shit joke, we know that means he's going to give us some facts on the other end of it. And that's really what we were trying to make. And it's, it's not the level of animation that, I've made a proper film. So to go from that to literally hacking into different computer systems to make things work is certainly a bit of a downgrade. But at the same time, it allows you a freedom. I think I've had more creativity on my YouTube channel than I probably ever had anywhere else, because you have the ability to match your ideas with visuals, and you can hack into different systems and make things. And And then occasionally I just say to her, "Oh, can you just animate this because I've got nothing to put in the middle of my video."
Oh, I mean, as I said, I think whenever anyone's able to establish a kind of unique look, I think that's a real achievement. And in particular, I mean, for listeners who might be unfamiliar with your work, or I mean, we have a sizable chunk of our listenership who will be even unfamiliar with cricket for the most part. I mean, you go what Americans would think of as being sort of inside baseball is really what you do, but for cricket. So the fact that you match what is, very statistically driven content, analytical content with more original visuals, I think is a nice way of delivering quite serious and could be potentially dry stuff with, quite a fun presentation. So in that sense, it's a great
Yeah,
achievement.
I think if you look at my sort of background, so obviously I'm a writer first, a feature writer with ESPN most of all, and then uh, filmmaker, uh, then amateur historian, or at least professional historian in cricket, but probably amateur historian if we're being honest. And then I really got into the analytics side of cricket because no one else was getting into it. My YouTube is just kind of a combination of all those four things. So the ability to tell a very, very dry story about some sort of analytical trend that's going on in cricket and then compare it to a very old player from the 1970s who has a ridiculous hairstyle with big glasses. That's how I wrote. But when you write it, you have to it's hard to get the thing through. But so here's a photo of this guy in these stupid glasses, and let me explain to you why he's important to this story. And so it really is. I think the YouTube is probably the closest thing to my personality, which is terrifying, I suppose, for people out there. But good fun for me.
So there's a lot of good topics you just put in that little sentence I want to touch base on, but I'm going to start. Eddie knows I'm a big fan of analytics, and it's interesting to me that you say there was very few people doing analytics in cricket, because when I think of cricket, I think that's a sport where the numbers and the data is so cut and dry, that you would be able that would have been one of the first sports to me, I would think. Like I think baseball, I think cricket, you have all that data there just ready to analyze. Why was no one doing it? And then kind of what was your approach to get into it? And what was some of the first things that you were looking at?
So one of my good friends is a guy called Andrew Sampson, and he's won Cricket Statistician of the Year a bunch of times, which is a real thing. I didn't just make that up. They actually give that out to someone. And he's a big baseball fan. And he's got his own database. And I said to him, look, I'm not being rude, Andrew, but you're one of the smartest guys I know. You've got this ball-by-ball database. You love baseball. You saw for the last 40 years baseball going in this direction. No one thought about it. I can't. It's so stupid. And looking back on it, and one of the problems is that cricket is even more complex than baseball when it comes to the sort of scoring and keeping of data, because there's so much more. So I don't know, how many baseball pitches do you have in a game? Like 150, 200, 250, something like that. Obviously, a test match is like, wait, let me try and work it out. It's a lot more than that. It's 1,500, something like that. It's probably more. I'll have to come back to you on that. I'm trying to remember my maths, but there's so many events. And when you score them in a scorebook in cricket, you can't really show that to anyone because it's so much, right? So what people started doing is we have a shorthand for that, which is the scorecard, which is like the box score in American terms. And the scorecard is actually brilliant, right? You can, if you've got a very good cricket brain, you can literally read the scorecard like it's a novel. It really is incredible. So no one went beyond that to go, wait a minute, that's like a novel. This is a novel. Let's get all this other stuff. And it's really only been the last 10 or 15 years that people have gone back to these old scorecards the original scorebooks and going, well, we can actually tell when they did this and who did this and all this sort of stuff. That was for the first move. The second move was really when the T20 came in. So for people who don't know anything about cricket was always one sport, which was a 5-day sport called Test cricket. And sometime in the 1960s, people realized that not everyone had 5 days to spend for their life in cricket, and that they'd play on a weekend for one day. Great idea. Then in the early 2000s, someone else was like, do you know what would be good if we had a sport that just went like early evening and was about the same time length as every other sport in the world, so about 3.5 hours, and we could do that. So we ended up with Test cricket, one-day cricket, and T20 cricket. T20 cricket was sort of taken over by the Indians quite early on with a league called the Indian Premier League, which is now like cricket's NBA. Huge league, billions of dollars. And what happened was, for the first time ever, it wasn't run nation by nation. It was run independently. So business owners came in. Now, you can imagine, if you're run by governments, as we all know, governments can be quite slow moving with new ways of doing things. Whereas you suddenly had a wealth of private money coming in and people going, well, I'm happy enough to spend a lot of money doing a cricket team, but I actually want this done properly. A lot of them were already American sports fans. A lot of them, had grown up in America or studied America. Also, Premier League football was coming through at that time. And I think they just wanted smarter things. So they started looking towards cricket analytics. So that was really between 2008 and 2012. But the major form of the game when it comes to writing and media was always the test game, and it didn't come into that. So unless you were really paying attention in T20, you didn't notice it. What happened really then was from 2012 through to probably now, it's spread throughout the entire game. And by 2016, you couldn't follow T20 cricket without knowing something about analytics because you couldn't work out what was happening. Nothing made sense. If you're watching it, it was like a different language of cricket. And there was no way to watch it and understand it. And I've got very good friends who still don't understand T20 cricket because they don't understand the numbers. And they're like, why would you make this call? That's against all cricket logic. And it is, but it's not against T20 cricket logic. And so the only way to follow that was through understanding analytics. So the boom then came through the media. And I suppose, I was working at Cricket Info then, so ESPN's cricket website. And they sort of said, I wrote a piece basically saying that everything written about T20 cricket is wrong because no one knows anything about it. And my editor called my bluff and went, well, why don't you go learn something about it? And I was like, okay, I will then. And I literally, I downloaded on my Kindle Moneyball. I did a Coursera course on baseball stats. And then luckily, I was getting back into basketball at that time. And I didn't realize that it had spread to basketball. But Seth Partnow and John Hollinger and, I think Stephen Shea is his name, all these great basketball, they were doing it. And I didn't really understand baseball specifics, but I understood basketball. So everyone else in cricket was following baseball and I was following basketball, but it's the same basic principles, right? Of, so we started with a metric called true economy rates, which is basically, I completely ripped off from true shooting in basketball. Which was we had to make it contextual because we were talking about economy rates and they didn't make one guy would bowl one over at one part of the game and one guy would bowl an over at the other part of the game and the two economy rates didn't match up. And so from that point forward, I think a lot of people started to get more involved. I probably just threw myself in a little bit more. I got some access to some databases. ESPN took it a little bit more seriously. And then I'm trying to think when I got offered a job. So I started writing analytically about cricket must have been late 2017, early 2018. And I was offered my first job 4 pieces later. Because there were so few people in the sport writing about this stuff that literally I wrote 4 pieces and one of the Big Bash team said, do you want to come work for us? And I was like, I haven't even finished reading Moneyball yet, guys. Like, I haven't done all the things in my Coursera course. Like, let's slow down. But that's how few people were doing it. So I really took it seriously from late 2017 into early 2018. And by the end of 2018, I think I had 4 different jobs offered to me by cricket teams, which tells you how quickly it all changed and also how lucky I was.
I mean, I'm sure I'd love to touch on the work that you then did with actual teams, but I mean, you're obviously taking inspiration from baseball and you have kind of the father of sabermetrics in Bill James, who spent a long time early on as sort of an outsider in a kind of underground movement within baseball. And even within Moneyball, right? That's a big plot line of the whole kind of Moneyball story, is that it was someone kind of going against the grain and throwing out a traditional approach to baseball. Why did you feel like in cricket the adoption rate was so much faster? Was it because of the progression that had been made elsewhere or because of the culture within the sport?
It wasn't faster because Bill James was doing his thing in 1980 and we started in 2008 and really it didn't take over till 2016, 2018. So it wasn't faster. What happened was that so many owners, so that IPL that I talked about before, the Indian Premier League, then there was Then there was a league in the Caribbean Premier League. Then there was the Pakistan Super League, Bangladesh Premier League, right? All these different leagues popped up in different places. All of them, for the first time ever, team owners, right? So if you suddenly, if in 1985 you didn't have the MLB, but you had baseball, and then in 1985 you had the MLB, probably Bill James' stuff comes in quicker, right? Because everyone's looking for an advantage. Everyone's starting from the scratch. When you have a legacy product, you have a bunch of old guys spitting tobacco into a bucket. It's a little bit harder to convince everyone. What we had was a sport still in its infancy in T20 cricket, and we had a bunch of people bringing money into the sport. So that's why it pushed forward. It's still not every professional cricket team in the world still has an analyst. So it's not like America where you have dugouts full of people and there are 20 people decoding every game and everything. We're still a long way back from that in cricket. But the people who did break through, like me, suddenly got offered. There was one year where I could have been working in the 1 year in Bangladesh, Scotland, St. Lucia, Melbourne. Where was the other job I was offered? Somewhere else. I can't remember what the fifth one was. Like in 1 year, I could have been working for 5 different teams. On, what a Bangladesh and St. Lucia got in common other than cricket, right? Like they're two different, worlds. And, then you've got Scotland, and all these jobs were happening. And it was really because there were more jobs at that point than there were people doing what I was doing. So I really think it was kind of a perfect storm, but it's slower than the other sports in some ways. And part of the reason is every basketball court's basically the same. I know that, people will say Boston, in Boston, the garden doesn't quite, the floor doesn't quite bounce the same way and all that sort of nonsense. But essentially all basketball courts are the same. The one thing that has sort of slowed down analytics, especially of recent times in cricket, is that cricket pitches are all completely different. So if you go to Guyana in the Caribbean, that is the ball never bounces above your knee height, and it's an absolute shithole, right? Like terrible cricket pitch. And then if you go to the Wacker in Western Australia, literally every ball bounces above your nipples, no matter what you do to it. Like, I could bowl at my pace and bounce someone and hit someone in the head on that wicket. And we probably very quickly reached a saturation point. So the next thing is, how do we catch up with the sorts of things that football, soccer, sorry, depending on where your audience is, and American sports have got to. So they've gone well beyond what we did. But what we've done, to go back to Frank's point before, is we've just opened up. We've gone from the scorecard to the score book, and we've opened that up digitally. And we had a big rush, and now everyone's sitting around going, oh, we've worked all this out now. Maybe we don't need all these analysts. But what we haven't got to is using the Hawkeye data, which I think is just coming to baseball, but we've had it in cricket for almost 20 years now, which is incredible technology. You see that used in the tennis. But not everyone has access to that. That will be the next. If that gets opened up to everyone, cricket will change dramatically because of how much information that we actually have. And we've had it, as I said, for the best part of 20 years. So that will take it forward, but there's still a lot of so in American sports, you have a lot of owners who own the teams because the teams are worth a lot of money. In soccer, professional football, you have a lot of people who own the sports because they're trying to distract you from how many people they're killing in their home country. And in cricket, we have a lot of people who own sports because they can take Instagram photos with their favorite cricketer. We're going to run into that as well, but we then have half of cricket is this free market, and the other half is still run by national teams, which is a 75-year-old man who doesn't really. He still uses. I can't even say he uses Hotmail. He's like his assistant uses his Hotmail account for him because he doesn't know how to use it. So there's always going to be like a ceiling there of how quickly it could grow in cricket. So it had a big bump, and now it's slowed down again, and it really won't until we get spatial tracking cameras like you have in baseball and basketball and the NFL. And football, we still don't monitor the players on the field correctly. We don't monitor the ball in relationship to where it is on the field. So when it gets bowled and hit, we know exactly what happens. Once it's hit into the outfield, no one follows it because it doesn't have a sensor in it yet. So little things like that we haven't caught up with. But what you have in cricket is a sport that has been professional for 250 years, and it is very much run by people who are 350 years old at some time.
That's great. It's so fascinating that I love the analytics side, but I think, Eddie mentioned we should probably go on to some of the teams and clubs and places you've been. So one of the interesting to me is you said that you were an analyst at St. Lucia, and were you able to go there? Like I've watched a decent amount of the Caribbean Premier League, and it's pretty wild and fascinating to me. Just the atmosphere is pretty crazy, and they seem to genuinely just love it so much, and you don't expect it, I guess, is kind of what I was thinking. What was that experience like when you were there?
Yeah, I think they market the Caribbean Premier League as the greatest party in sports or
It
something
looks
like that.
like it.
And it really, yeah, it's not like that in every island. St. Lucia's a bit more calm because St. Lucia's a French island. And they do have cricket, but it's not their sport, if that makes sense. But when you get to Barbados and Trinidad, Jamaica, Guyana, I always think the Guyanese crowd are completely ruined by the fact that they love their team, they always have a good team, and then they have to play it on a cricket pitch that actually ruins the sport. But they get in, and it's like people hanging out of the grandstands there. You've got full bands playing. It's like, calypso in one place, but the next island will have SoCal music, which I didn't even know anything about before I worked in that league. I had to learn what SoCal music was, something to do with Trinidad. It's like dance music, but more fun. I can't explain it any better than that. I think it's called SoCal. I hope I haven't mixed up the name, but it's an incredible form of music. And you have DJs and you have women in carnival uniforms. It really is completely a bizarre experience to go into. But for me, like I was a journalist, my first offer was from an Australian team to go back to Melbourne. And they had offered me the job. So I'd left ESPN. And in the meantime, St. Lucia had offered me a job. And I was like, so I went there first. So I literally went from being a journalist a week earlier to being an analyst. The people I had written about were in my team. And I don't know how much you guys know, but there's a couple of great writers who also do a podcast, Ben Lindbergh and Sam Miller. They do is it called Evolving Wild? I don't want to get the name of their podcast wrong. So they did a similar thing where they were journalists and they became analysts. Well, they became like general managers of I don't want to say minor league. It's probably unfair. Like a farm league, baseball team, like the shittest league in baseball. They took over, and I'd read their book, and I reread it again on the plane over to St. Lucia, and I contacted Sam and said, what advice can you give me? And when I told him my situation, like they went in and they had like guys going from junior college to play, they're basically guys who were never going to be professional baseballers, but wanted one last summer to play with them, right? And I was going in, and in my team was David Warner, who had made front page news almost everywhere in the world for being part of a scandal called Sandpaper Gate, which you could Google, which involved literally a human man putting sandpaper into his underwear live on TV. That I'm not making any of this up. This happened. So he's one of the most famous cricketers in the world and a great cricketer. You then had Darren Sammy, who's like the president of St. Lucia. He's more famous than anyone who's been from St. Lucia in a very, very long time. And a guy called Kyron Pollard, who's one of the most famous cricketers on the planet. Like all these ridiculous people. And I've written about all these guys. They're more than aware I've written about them. And I have to go in. That's a weird enough environment. I'm now leading team meetings, discussing tactics with these people. And then 3 days later, we're in Trinidad, and there are people hanging off the roofs, cheering the game. The music was so loud that you couldn't talk to anyone who wasn't like in your ear. It was such a weird league. I mean, West Indians and people from the Caribbean, a lot of people say they don't love their cricket anymore. I think it just wasn't packaged the way that they wanted it for a long time. And the Caribbean Premier League, which hilariously is run by Irish people, but came in and really soaked up the West Indian life. And if you've only ever been to the West Indies in a resort, you probably don't really get West Indian life. Like, I've been to the resorts in the Caribbean where all the Americans are hanging out. That's not what the Caribbean is like. You need to go to the center of town and see how they party, or go to Carnival, or just go to any rum shack and ask to play dominoes with a random guy. There will be a John Candy in every bar who never left because of how much they love it. That's a cool Runnings reference. You can cut that out if you want. But that's the kind of West Indies that I think they managed to capture for the Caribbean Premier League. So it's almost like, I don't know, if the NBA wasn't run by people who think they know what's fun. Like, imagine if Kiss Cam wasn't a thing, but people were just kissing because they were horny. That's what the Caribbean Premier League is like.
What a description.
Can't wait to clip that one out.
It's so uncorporate in its way, and it's so brilliant that the way that it lives, and you can't help but So West Indian cricket fans, most cricket fans. Oh, just fucked up my headphones there. 1 second. So England dominate cricket because they invented the sport, and then through their colonization and ruining the rest of the world, they spread cricket. Ruined the world, but gave them cricket. It's almost 50-50, I think, in some ways. But while doing that, it means that a lot of cricket is run the way that it is in England. And in England, that's why we wear all white, right? That's why they eat cucumber sandwiches. That's why we stop for tea. We actually stop for tea in our sport, right? Despite the fact I've never drunk tea in my life and hate tea, I still have to, when I'm playing a game of cricket or when I'm covering it professionally, I have to stop for a 20-minute tea break. It's stupid. But in different parts of the world, it developed in different ways. Like in Australia, we really rebelled against the English side. So if you go to cricket grounds, especially back, 20, 30 years ago, they were quite vicious. There's a lot of throwing urine up in the air during, Mexican waves and throwing golf balls at opposition cricketers. Not exactly how the England do it. And the other country that I think really took it their own way very early on was the West Indians. But because they fell out of love with it, because their team didn't get very good, they left. I think the Caribbean Premier League has allowed for younger people to come, but also the old guys who like yelling abuse at everyone. They found, it's easy to yell abuse when there's 5,000 people around to laugh at your jokes. If it's just you and your friends who you play dominoes with and you're yelling abuse, you just sound like a crazy person at a certain point, right? So I think the Caribbean Cricket Premier League really did all that. But what a weird place to start my analytical journey. Where literally, I remember one time I'm trying to get my laptop to work, and there's 3 women walking past me, full carnival, basically just nipples and vagina covered. Everything else is there, feathers up out their ass, off the top of their head, walking around on stilts or something, and I'm sitting there trying to get Excel to work. It's a weird place to begin that kind of thing, but it was a great experience for me. I worked for one of the worst owners in professional sports. So I got to learn everything you should not do when it comes to running a team. And I had a great amount of fun when doing it.
So I guess I know my next vacation spot.
Yeah. If you Trinidad and Guyana are the most fun. I'm trying to think. See, the problem is if you go to Barbados, there's just too many white English people and it costs too much.
Eddie's favorite vacation spot.
Actually, if you're going to do it, there's a really fun one, and I don't know if they'll have a team for that much longer, but St. Kitts is really good, except for all the Americans. But St. Kitts is great because the crowd get into it, and then there's just a whole beach with nightclubs that you can go to afterwards, which all the players go to. Which is good fun. So it's basically St. Kitts when there's a cricket tournament on. All there is cricket fans, cricketers, and Americans who couldn't get into veterinary college in America.
An interesting mix. Now, for some context, my mother is half of her family is from Guyana, so I have sort of my Guyanese my ties, and I've gone there. I mean, I think the only downside to visiting Guyana for cricket is the location of the stadium too. Is a bit of a downer.
Oh.
But
I remember I did they found out that I was there once, and they were like, ESPN journalist, we'll get him on local radio. And she was like, well, how do you feel about Guyana? And I was like, I love it here. It's like a combination of the West Indies and the subcontinent. It's got this great vibe. And she's like, yeah. And they talked me up. And then we went to a song, and she came back and she goes, you really like it? It's kind of shit here. And I was like, oh my God, even the locals fucking moan about it. But I love Guyana. The food there is incredible. As I said, you get out of the resorts in the Caribbean, and it's an incredible. And every island is so different. Grenada is my favorite. If you ever have a chance to have a look at some cricket in Grenada, it's basically only known because Ronald Reagan took the place over. It's one of my favorite places in the world. It doesn't have that many tourists. Great people, great food, great beaches, and less English people, which is always good.
Eddie, I wonder when he was in Guyana if he heard about our softball victory.
Yeah, it's true.
We're very famous Guyanese athletes.
It wasn't mentioned to me, but next time I go back, I'll ask around.
You can ask. I mean, we might be one of the only Guyanese teams to have won an international tournament recently. 10 years ago, we were in Paris, and we were playing on an American softball team, fast pitch softball team here. In this kind of weird league that takes place here, where there's it originally was a Japanese only league, and then now there's multiple Japanese teams, a kind of Dominican team. It's this weird experience. We were on this American team, and we were told that there was this embassy tournament being organized coming up, and so we were given this number of this sort of, I don't know, someone fairly high up in the American Marines who was based in Paris, and we asked if we could try out for the team, and we were told that they didn't need anyone other than the Marines, that they would be fine and they would win this tournament with just the Marines. So we decided that we would form our own team, but we were told the
The
only requirement
anti-Marines.
was we had to represent an embassy, and we had to represent an embassy that definitely wouldn't be submitting a team. And so we kind of thought for a second, and just because with my mother being sort of Guyanese, we decided, well, that's the embassy we represent. They don't actually have an embassy in Paris, so I wrote to the consulate in London. They gave us the okay to sort of represent them loosely. And then as it went on, we went on to win the tournament. So I think we're one of the few sort of individual sporting successes for Guyana in the last couple of decades.
Yeah, they haven't had much else. They had a great cricketer called Shivnarine Chanderpaul who had the weirdest technique probably in modern cricket. And eventually he was fired. After having a 20-year career as a great player, he was let go by a text message. Not ideal. Not an
No,
ideal way to find that your career is finished.
no.
I mean, it's bad enough if that happens, and that's like bad if you've been dating someone for six months and they break up with you by text message. Imagine like being the best batter your country has for a long period of time, and then just go, "Sorry, we don't need you, Shiv. Have fun."
Yeah, no, it's not the softest way to sort of land the blow. I wanted to ask you. We have one set of questions we sort of wanted to ask you about changes to cricketing rules that you thought could be implemented, and I know you recently did a video about how Test match cricket could be changed. But one thing you mentioned which was the lack of sort of spatial data. In that, what do you think the impact of that type of data could have on traditional fielding positions, which in some respects seem kind of arbitrary in terms of where people are being placed? I know that there's a lot more. If you like watch, say, Owen Morgan, he's putting a lot more thought into maybe some of those placements. But how much do you think that could be impacted? And do you think there are, say, positions that exist right now which just would never be used in the future once the kind of data has come more into the game?
No, I can't imagine it. I mean, a cricket sort of. I always say that like NFL quarterbacks or even high school quarterbacks get these huge playbooks. You couldn't actually write down all the fielding combinations in cricket because it's endless. And I think that there's always a reason for a fielder to be in a certain place in a certain time. So even if you might get positions, if we had more data that would suggest that some positions are not as useful, but I don't think you'd ever get there's no reason for never to put a person in a random spot in cricket because on any given day, that's where the ball is going, if that makes sense. I think what would probably, uh, so cricket's had two incredible periods where it was, well, in some cases, hundreds of years ahead of the world, but in other cases, 80 or so years ahead of everyone else. The first one was something called bodyline, where we started. So in baseball, obviously, if you hit the batter, he gets to walk. And in cricket, if you hit the batter, you get to bowl at him again with a broken arm. And so there's a much more violence involved in cricket. Uh, and it's a different kind of courage than you need for other sports because a lot of it is not courage based until someone has hit you and then you shoot yourself. And so, like rugby players, for instance, when they play cricket, they back away and they're like the toughest athletes there are. They don't wear pads and they just run into each other. And even they're afraid in cricket. So it's a really weird kind of bravery. And Bodyline came out of the fact that there was a guy called Don Bradman who was, I suppose, in some ways, the Babe Ruth of cricket. In fact, there's a photo of the two of them together. Babe Ruth was a Don Bradman fan, and Don Bradman was a Babe Ruth fan. And back in the days when cricket was still quite popular in America, and he was that good that they had to just bowl at his head because there was no other options left, right? And the way they found out about this was in the 1930s. They looked at cinema footage. So, old Pathé reels. They had a few reels of him batting, and they went through them one after the other. That's the birth of video analysis, right? And cricket, it only took us about another 80 years after every other sport had already started using that normally for us to go, we should go back to that video analysis that we used to stop the greatest batter ever for a little while. It's a bit like baseball when, like, was it Ted Williams when they went, oh, we should actually start moving the fielders where he's hitting the ball. And then for about 50 years, they went, actually, let's stop doing that because it worked with a really good guy. Why would we want to do it for the really shit players? The other thing that cricket was massively ahead of was everywhere that the ball was hit on a field, some old fella would draw a line. And we did it more for the boundaries than for the ones and twos and threes. So when the ball hit the rope or hit the fence or went over the rope or fence, and someone would mark them, and we've got these going back for I mean, I think the oldest ones are over 250 years old. Cricket's so ridiculously old, and we have so and so made runs, and here's his lines on a graph of where he hit the ball. No one ever thought to mark where the fielders were. So what we really have is very, very great maps of where fielders weren't standing. So you could see in one part of the wicket, there'll be like a bunch of boundaries in this direction and a bunch of boundaries in this direction. So you know there's probably someone standing in the middle, and this guy's trying to hit it on this side of him or hit it on this side of him. And so that was we are now in the analytics era, and we still don't know where the fielders are. So we have companies like Opta, who I think do some stuff in American sports. They also do football stuff. They're a football professional soccer company, but they also did cricket. And I sat next to them. This must have been 10 years ago. Going, what are you marking? And they showed me shot type and all this great stuff that I now use. And I was like, you haven't said where the fielders are standing. Oh, well, that's just too much. And I was like, I kind of feel like that's an important thing. If you get spatial tracking, obviously, no little Muppet has to be pressing into their iPad where the fielders are. We could just work that out automatically. So I don't think it would change fielding patterns, but I think it would certainly. What it's done is it's given captains certainty. So having the Hawkeye data and even having people do it manually means that if I go into a bowler now and I say you really need to bowl back of the length outside of stump, which means is some of this going out on video?
I'll make sure this bit goes out on video. Yeah.
So if I'm standing here, it's basically up here, right? So quite high, right, in this area. If I would have said to a bowler before, you need to bowl there, they'd be like, why would we bowl there? I'm going to bowl where I bowl. Now, it's like, you need to bowl here. Here's the data to be able to back that up. So that's what will happen with the fielding positions. I think, we've seen what baseball's been able to do. And let's be honest, baseball was idiotic when it came to fielding positions for the longest time. Just like, we're just going to spread them out everywhere, even though this guy only ever hits to one side of the field, right? Cricket was always a lot smarter than that. And, always put fielders where it thought players were hitting. But there's a difference between putting fielders where you think players are hitting and putting fielders where you know they're exactly hitting. And I think that's what we'll be able to get to with that kind of spatial tracking that you're talking about. And we can then work out. So obviously the one difference between cricket and baseball when it comes to hitting is batters actually change the face of their bat depending on where they want to hit it. We'll be able to understand which players are better at that and are worse than that once we start getting that kind of data in as well. So we really have to track the bowler, the field placement, and then where the fielders go. Those are the next three biggest things because we're tracking most of the other things at the moment.
So, you say baseball took a long time to figure that out. I mean, they're now making the shift illegal in their new players agreement.
I mean, what? It's oh my god! So that was one of the things. I think I might have been on Ben's podcast once, and we were talking about this. Like, I would watch baseball in the 90s, just put everyone on the leg side. What do you call it? Left field? Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone is swinging in that direction. Why on earth have you got so many fielders on the other side? It made absolutely no sense to me. And it's funny when you see these things. I always used to do the same. I played a bit of basketball. I was like, why doesn't everyone just shoot 3-pointers? Like, why doesn't a team just go out and find the best 3-pointers? And it takes an outsider says that. And if you say that to people inside the sport, they'll be like, wait, you got to understand that there aren't that many 3-point shooters out there and blah, 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 blah. And you got to understand that, we can't do the shift for all batters, blah, blah. And it's like, actually, we can do these things. It's just that because you guys are so used to the sport being played that way, you don't do it. And there are plenty of those with cricket. Like, for instance, for generations, we used to bowl outside the stumps, so away from the thing that gets the batter out. And it's like the last couple of years with the data are like, maybe if we aimed at those things that dismiss the batters more often, we might get more wickets. And I think it's easy to say that. NFL is another one. I'd be watching NFL and go, why is everyone running the ball? You get like 2-yard gains. Throw the ball. Like, that's where all the field is open. There's no one out there. And I think that what data allows is for people like me who never understood sports to be like, look, we were right. We might be mad, us people, but we've got a point. And it just takes a while for these sports to change. And so that's what cricket needs. It needs the technology. And then it needs for a couple of years of the coaches going, I see what you're saying, but we're not going to do it anyway because we never did it in my day. And then eventually it all snaps and suddenly, everyone's throwing the ball in the NFL, right?
Yeah. And you're definitely seeing that in the NFL now where you're starting to see the coaches who are trusting analytics and, not trusting it one time and then it not working and then backtracking and say, we're not going to trust it. There are coaches now who they're going to live and die by the analytics because that's, you have built up data over a long period of time. It's statistically going to work. So,
exactly. I mean, my only analytic thing with the NFL is that I used to play John Madden, and it was much better to throw the ball. That's all I've got to add to it. But it made sense on the computer game, and I generally think it made sense on NBA Jam to shoot 3-pointers, and it made sense on Madden to throw the ball further. That's all I'm saying.
So what are the other? Because Eddie and I actually did discuss that. We want to kind of shoot some things off you about how the game could be changed, and then literally you just posted a YouTube video, I think it was yesterday or the day before, about how you can change the test game. And the thing that I was going to bring up was something I think you touched on, so maybe you can just touch on it briefly here, is when and how can cricket be less reliant on weather and conditions? Is that ever going to happen, or are there ways that it can happen that it's starting to? I mean, especially for test cricket, I mean, you could lose 2-3 days because of bad weather. And is there anything that is this ever going to be different?
So test cricket is so difficult because all cricket is so difficult because you can't play it in the rain, right? A bit like tennis and baseball. That's fine. I think we can all accept that there are certain sports that you can't play in the rain. The problem with cricket is you also can't play when there's too much moisture on the ground. And you also can't play just before, while it's starting to rain, and also just after it's rained. And you also can't play through drizzle. So I know there are some tennis tournaments you can't do that. Obviously, playing on grass becomes quite tricky if there's a little bit of rain. But you can basically play in the French Open until the balls get too wet to go up in the air, right? And you can play baseball through a little bit of drizzle without too much of a problem. Cricket, we can't do that because the kind of balls that we have. One sec. So it's a leather ball, like baseball, but baseballs are horsehide, which I think is slightly different. So this is just cow leather, and you can see, if I can bring it anywhere near my camera, you can see that once it starts to get the lacquer off it, it starts to chip open a little bit, right? This is a rubbish ball. That's fine. You can see that it starts to chip open a little bit. Once that pink bit, there's got to be a better word for it than that, but once that pink bit gets wet, the ball becomes almost useless. So you have about 5 or 10 overs where it does what you want it to do. And then eventually, if anyone's ever had, a lovely leather jacket, suede jacket that they've taken out in the rain, there's a whole Seinfeld episode about that, right? Eventually it gets ruined. And what happens with this is that leather takes all the moisture in and the ball just gets bigger and bigger. And you can't get it. It's useless. It's almost not fit for cricket anymore, right? So there's problem one, that these things don't play the game the way that they should be. Problem two is that we play on turf. Think of it, the best way of explaining it is, imagine Wimbledon, but baseball, all right? So it's a grass thing and it lives and breathes. When it gets wet and you're throwing, so these are, I think they're roughly around the same weight as a baseball, about maybe a little bit harder than a baseball, I think, altogether. But more or less the same as a baseball. Imagine it hitting grass on a wet surface. So two things happen. The first is that when it's a little bit wet, it literally digs out little holes, right? And it bounces straight up. Now, if someone's bowling at 90 miles an hour or 95 miles an hour, the last thing you want is the ball coming vertically at you after it bounces. And also it's worse because it doesn't always do that. Sometimes it goes slow. So you're thinking, I've got to protect, and then it's coming up here. So it's dangerous. The second thing is, even if that only happens for an hour or a couple of hours, what it does is those little divots are still on the pitch from all the times you've done it. And it means that later on in the game, when it gets dry, they crack. And now you've got the ball can hit them and go in any direction. So we can't really play in the rain because the ball would get slippery and dangerous. And also people are running into bowl, and that's also dangerous. We can't play just after the rain because because the pitch would get wet and it would bounce straight up as well. And we can't play later on because the ball is rubbish and we might also damage the pitch. We've basically created a sport that in England, of all places, that cannot be played in the rain, which is hilarious. That it could, of all the places that this sport would ever have got big in England. So the only ways to really get around this is to find a ball that is not leather, that still degrades. So the great thing about baseball doesn't matter. You throw a baseball, gets hit out of the park, you get another one. It's almost always a brand new sort of ball, right? Cricket, we actually want this to last for 80 overs, which is, I've got to start doing better maths than this. What's that? 400 odd pitches, 500 odd pitches, right? We want it to degrade. This is what it starts like. This is pink, so I can't help you there, but it should be red. But this is what we use for day night. This is what it ends like. It has to go from this to become this for our sport to work, right? If it stayed like this the whole time, no one would ever score any runs because of this big seam in the middle. It swings around everywhere. You need it to degrade into this so that the game is balanced, right? The problem is there aren't that many synthetic substances that degrade well, as you might have known from us ruining the planet with plastics. So we haven't found at this stage something that will do that. The second thing is, as I said before, we're still playing on turf. Now, I think one day, and we've already started to do this, we'll have a hybrid between grass and synthetic. So what we'll do is there'll be a synthetic matting sort of weaved into the surface with grass on top. I still think that if someone's bowling one of these things at 90 miles an hour and it's a little bit wet, that's going to make uneven divots on the pitch. I could be wrong, but I don't want to be the person with a bat in my hand to work that out. So it means that we're always going to be limited by rain. The only other thing that we can do is have roofs. The problem is, as you probably know in America, they're not particularly cheap to put up. And also, cricket is a regional sport. So you play... So if you have a test match, you only get like one a year. And you will play a lot of lower level, like minor league cricket, essentially, right? The rest of the year, you can't justify having that roof. And so financially, it doesn't really work. If we did it in a different way, maybe one particular sport, one particular part of the sport could do it or whatever. And then the third problem is that if you have a sport that is played on turf, having a roof is not a particularly good thing in growing that turf. So we have one ground in Australia at the Docklands, and the pitch has never been that good, probably partially because they grow it somewhere else and then they bring it in for the summer, and there's only like a slit of light that comes through, so it doesn't get as much light as anywhere else would, and it doesn't grow as much as it needs to. So we haven't really worked it out. I think the best way will be eventually if we ever get to a point where we can do a retractable cheap roof that at least stops the rain during the game. But I'm not holding my breath. I mean, I might be alive when it happens. I mean, depending on Putin and Ukraine, we might not be alive next week. But, there is a chance that they might get to it one day. But it's not. I'm not holding my breath for that, for sure.
I'm aware we don't want to keep you for too long, but one of the rules changes that you mentioned, which is one that I guess I'm occasionally frustrated by, which is the sort of lack of a substitution process in cricket, which particularly in test matches, if a bowler is injured, I mean, for listeners who are unaware, the kind of way you have substitutions now is that a player can come onto the field to replace them, but fundamentally do no sort of key tasks. So cannot bat, cannot...
You can come on and field.
Yeah, they're just
that's all you can do.
body.
You can come on and field.
Yeah.
Yep. And in the old days, you weren't even allowed to wicket keep if you came onto the field. So if your catcher got injured, your wicket keeper, you couldn't even replace it. Someone else from the outfield had to come and catch. That's how strict we were with the anti-substitution clauses in cricket.
And I mean, I can maybe understand the idea of the sort of full substitution. What blows my mind at times, and I know there was some controversy in the Big Bash League last season, when they're sort of abusing the spirit of the game by substituting a batsman who was out there. It blows my mind in the limited form of the game where you can't see that a batsman is struggling and not scoring at the run rate you would want, and simply not opt to bring him off and bring someone else on, with the requirement that obviously in the future he might have to bat again. Do you see any kind of solution or any movement within cricket for an alteration to the substitution policies?
The fact that, so this is only the second time we've had open substitutions. So we had them in the early 2000s with something called the super sub rule, but it was terrible. It's like they wanted to bring substitutions in, but they were so nervous of what everyone would say, they made it impossible to use so that no one used it and it went away. The Big Bash has brought it in. It was my understanding that the 100, which is the new English version of the IPL or the Big Bash, was going to do it. The thing is that you have to understand that American sports are not like any other sports in the world, in that they grew almost organically on their own. Most other sports don't have substitutions traditionally, right? So the earliest substitutions in football that I found was, I think, 1853, right? But they were pre-game substitutions from the team that you had named as your lineup. And I think it was because like the team bus didn't make it or something, right? And they had to change it. It wasn't regular to have football substitutions until the 1950s. I think rugby only brought it in maybe 20 or 30 years ago as well. So American sports were very big on that. So much so that, in the NFL, you don't have to even be able to play offense and defense, right? And in basketball, no one is expected to play a full game. That's not the case. Obviously, look at soccer to this day. You have 3 substitutions. The majority of the players have to play all the game through. That's where you're coming from with England, a sport that was created in England. Now, the interesting thing about this is it creates 2 very, very divergent things. In the NFL, the person who is, let's say, the best receiver of all time doesn't ever have to be good at anything defensive, right? So you get the absolute best cornerback going up against the absolute best receiver. I hope I've got those 2 positions correct in that. I think I have. Remembering back my John Madden experience, right? So you have to act 2 best. In cricket, we have what is probably the opposite of that, where you can have the world's greatest bowler. We had a guy once called Richard Hadley, played for New Zealand. He was the world's greatest bowler, and he was bowling to a guy called Mike Whitney for Australia, who, if he stuck the bat up his ass, he wouldn't have been any worse. Right? Absolutely, Frank, Edward, Abbey, all 3 of you, similar batting talent to Mike Whitney. He understood what a bat was for, and he played the game, but he didn't know how to use it. He was a fast bowler, but because of the way that cricket was run, we had the ability where the greatest bowler in the world had to bowl to basically a bloke off the street. That's an incredible part of cricket that doesn't exist in other sports. If we go down the route that you're talking about, we lose something really, really interesting, which is that everyone has to bat in cricket, and occasionally most people will bowl, right? Like you get, in a normal game, you probably have minimum 5, you might get 6 people bowling. Sometimes you might get 7 or 8 people bowling, right? Again, most other sports don't allow for that. That's a really unique thing with cricket. The problem is Mike Whitney shits, and more often than not, Mike only last 1 or 2 balls, right? And sometimes it's the best thing in the world watching Mike Whitney try and save a test against Richard Hadley. More often than not, Mike Whitney's gone, and even if we have a chuckle, we've forgotten about it before. What you probably want is a sport with the absolute best bowlers face the absolute best batters, which is where baseball's going with. That's why designated hitter exists, right? Again, I'm completely on side with that. But one thing I think where baseball has always missed out compared to cricket is, and if you want any proof of this, have a look at the young Japanese lad who basically took over baseball last year, is that when you have someone who can bat and bowl, there is absolutely nothing like it. When he's better than everyone at one form of the sport and is almost as good as them at the other form of the sport, suddenly it's like you've got a rock star in your sport like that. Japanese guy doesn't even speak English, publicly in Otani, and yet, I mean, I don't even follow baseball, and I probably know everything about him, right, at this point. And we've had a bunch of those in cricket, including a guy called Imran Khan, who was so good at cricket that they gave him Pakistan. He's like now the prime minister of Pakistan, right? I'm not saying that's going to happen with Otani in Japan, but I'm not saying it's not going to happen, right? All-rounders are so dynamic and so sexy. If we go the specialist route in cricket, we will lose a bit of that, right? But the other side of it is, as you've already pointed out, it's like, this guy's not doing very well. Can we not just yank him and put someone else in who's more better? I don't think there's a sport that fixates as much on selection and who's in the team or not in the team as cricket, because whoever's in the team is really important. If you make a mistake in your selection, for the next 5 days, that's all anyone's going to talk about. That doesn't happen in basketball or baseball or even soccer, because just substitute them out. And okay, we went into this game with not enough 7-footers. Well, we can bring another 7-footer in. Oh, we went into this game and we don't have enough grunts in the midfield. We can bring a midfielder in. We went into this game without a spinner in cricket. Well, we're fucked, right? And that's the difference. It's the genius of cricket, but it goes the other way. I think even though I wrote about it in the test piece, I think eventually that's where T20 cricket will go. We'll have squads of 15, maybe even 20, and you'll just sub people in as you need them, and it'll be the best versus the best. Whether it'll ever happen in Test cricket or not, I don't know. But I know that if we design Test cricket today, there's no way we wouldn't have substitution. It just happens to be that the reason we don't have much day-night cricket is because cricket existed before electrification. And the reason that we don't have substitutions is that cricket was put it this way. We had a cricketer called W.G. Grace who was famous all around the world before the modern Olympics. Like, cricket is so old and so big that a lot of the problems that we still have today is because it made a lot of sense in 1820. It's just that no one's gone, maybe 200 years later, we should change this.
Yeah, and I love the idea of the all-rounder, because we had Chris Cairns on last week, and I asked him, being an American, to me, it's something that's so different, because in America, it's all about specialization. You want to be, even like now, baseball's gotten so specialized that a pitcher just has to be the best at throwing like a fastball or like a cut seam, like one pitch. That's it. You're not even a pitcher who has multiple pitches. Like, you just want to be the best at this one. So that the idea of having someone who can bowl and bat is such a neat concept to me. I love that aspect of cricket. But I guess I'll give my last question then, since we're kind of running out of time. So I want to switch gears a little bit. So you co-wrote and co-directed award-winning sports documentary "Death of a Gentleman," and I'm kind of cutting in here because Eddie is a self-proclaimed sports documentary enthusiast. So I kind of want to just hear about what was that process like, because you called yourself a cricket writer, but it's obviously a big shift, and you're doing your YouTube videos and you have the graphics and videos, things like that, but this has got to be such a different jump and a leap into kind of a different aspect. So what was that like, and how long did that take, and just kind of walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, it was crazy. Weirdly, it's the only thing I've actually trained for. So I was a filmmaker when I was in Melbourne. So I was a high school dropout and a gardening school dropout. I don't know if that matters, but I dropped out of both. Well, I was kind of kicked out of high school, I suppose, but that's anyway. And when I was in my mid-20s, I went back to film school. And although I didn't pass, so I don't know if that counts as me actually doing that either. But I went to film school anyway. And then we started doing those YouTube videos. So I started on my own, then I started with my friend Sam, and we'd done them for about a year, and no one was paying for them because it was before the whole pivot to video. Sadly, if you're a media fan, you'll be aware of the pivot to video period. So we were just before that. No one was making it. Was like me and Sam were doing it on Cricket Info, and there was like Men in Suits. Is that what they're called? The American football guys. That was it. Of sports, sort of like mainstream media on YouTube. It was like literally us. The algorithm would suggest our videos or their videos. And after about a year of not getting paid, we were like, what's the next step? And so Sam says we should make a film. But because I am a filmmaker, I was like, just so you know, Sam, it's really hard to make a film. It's not just we'll make a film. Things need to happen. People need to give us money, all sorts of things. Cut to 4 years later, and we made a film after scouring the earth for money, after scouring the earth to work out what the hell was happening with cricket. And I suppose it's a film really more about two people following something that they love, trying to work out why the people who run it are so either inept or corrupt. So it becomes, it probably started as more of a sports film and probably ends up more of a political sort of film. I remember we had a camera operator, and he'd worked in Kenya and Pakistan, I think. Maybe it was Afghanistan. It was one of the elections in one of those places. And in Kenya, he worked for an election as well. And we were in Dubai filming a cricket documentary. He goes, I feel more under pressure here than I did over there. We were hearing things, and, they came after my job. They took our press accreditations away. There were rumors that I could never go to Chennai again, because that's where one of the guys who was very angry was going to, I've been to Chennai again, great seafood. So it was 4 years of basically trying to build up enough money to make a film. And while we were making the film, we were really lucky that the evil people that we were making the film about decided to take over cricket. And so suddenly we went from having a film where we had to convince people there was a story here to being, no, look, it's on the front page. And we were ahead of the game. So we got very lucky at the end after 3 years of literally going up to people trying to convince them of what was happening. I mean, you'd be shocked to know that people don't race to finance a film about cricket administration the way that you would hope. But by the end, it was I don't know if sexy is the right term, but it was in the news enough that we got. But then we couldn't sell it. We had huge per cinema ratings because all of our cinema were sold out, but the cinemas wouldn't show it properly because they said it was a cricket film and it wouldn't work. And then we couldn't sell it to anyone when we first had it. And then within about 4 to 5 months, suddenly Netflix bought it and they ran it for 4 or 5 years. Amazon Prime bought it, and then suddenly it sort of exploded for us. But it was the hardest thing I've ever done. In some ways, it was the most fun and the most terrifying thing I've ever done. There's absolutely no way I would ever get into a project like that again without knowing when we were going to finish the project. But I'm very glad I did it. And I suppose professionally it helped a lot. But it's also, when you're a sports writer, I think a lot of your stuff is writing what happened yesterday, if that makes sense, which is great. And it's an awesome thing to be able to do. Doing a documentary like that, no one can ever accuse us of not putting our asses on the line for the sport that we loved. It could have ruined my career. It almost ruined my career several times. Sam doesn't work in cricket anymore because of how much he felt alienated and let down by the cricket industry when that film came out, I think, as much as anything. And so it was tough, but geez, it's fun, like going through it, like, some of the nonsense that we did. And, I remember almost being arrested in an airport in India for getting my camera out and getting thrown out of the hotel in UAE and, random things like that, like being eye to eye in some random place with a guy who's clearly a sociopath that if he could would have you beaten, all those good things you only get when you do an investigative journalistic sort of documentary. And I suppose that was my Louis Theroux moment. And I realized at the end that Louis Theroux and Michael Moore and Nick Broomfield must be absolutely out of their mind to continue to want to do this. They're so hard. And you find yourself in such situations where you're like, will I be able to get out of this? More often than not. And mine was, as I said, it was a cricket documentary. You wouldn't really expect to be able to do that. But that's where we were. And it was a lot of fun and very hard.
Definitely not an experience you would associate with making a cricket documentary. I think that's for sure. And I mean, aware of the time, I think we've only kind of begun to scratch the surface of questions we'd probably like to ask you and topics we'd probably like to touch on. So it might be great to have you back on in the future and kind of have a part 2 where we can dig into some of those areas. But Jarrod, it's been a pleasure speaking with you, and thank you so much for giving your time to us.
No worries. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much. We appreciate it.